Welcome back to Sprague Homestead. Today we're going to talk about what to do when your rabbit goes off feed. Having a rabbit go off feed can be a pretty serious thing. Not always, but it can be a pretty serious thing. So what we're going to talk about today is things to look for when your rabbit goes off feed and what to do about it. The first thing you want to look for, if you've noticed that a rabbit hasn't eaten, especially in 24 hours, you want to take a really close look at your rabbit. This is the time that you want to go ahead and do a health check, even if you've done one a few weeks ago, and really get into that rabbit and see if there's anything that might be causing him or her to go off of its feed. Some of these things include ear mites, fur mites, sore hocks. They can have respiratory infections. You could be looking at vent disease, which is an infection of the reproductive organs. These are all things you want to take a really close look at. If you find any of these problems, then you want to stop and address those and see if that corrects it. If you've done a health inspection on the rabbit and that's not the case, then you need to start looking at your feed. While you're doing your physical examination, do not forget to check the teeth. Tooth issues, a lot of times, especially in new owners that are inexperienced, tooth issues can cause rabbits to go off feed and you don't always see it. This can include any kind of malocclusion issues where either the bottom teeth are overgrown, the upper teeth are overgrown. We could have lost a tooth. I had a rabbit pull a tooth out one time on the wire and went off feed for a little bit because it was sore in his mouth. So make sure during your physical examination, while you've got the rabbit turned over and you're looking at everything else, go ahead and pull up those upper lips and check for tooth issues as well. A lot of times they're pretty easy to correct by just adding some hard chew toys or finding a more experienced rabbit owner in your area that actually knows how to trim teeth. I do not, under any circumstances, advise a new owner that's never done it before to clip teeth. I will be totally transparent here. In the years that I've owned rabbits, I have never trimmed teeth. I had a buck, if you saw some of our videos before, a Trianta buck that we took in from a neglect situation that had bad teeth. I did take him to a friend of mine who's been raising rabbits for about 20 years, and she actually trimmed the teeth. Now that I've had a bit of a tutorial on it, I probably will attempt my next one, but there again, you can make so many mistakes with teeth trimming that if that is the issue, do yourself a favor and find a more experienced breeder that can help you with that. Some of the most common reasons why a rabbit will quit eating feed, especially if you have several of them in the barn that suddenly go off of a feed, even if you've been feeding it, this usually indicates that there is a feed issue. So you want to go ahead and get into your feed, take a really good look at it. You're going to want to smell it, check it for color, and really go through it. Now, if it's a new bag of feed, you may want to go out and pull the bag that it came out of and check for the milling date. You could just be finding that the feed itself is old. If a feed is old and stale over 3 months, a lot of times rabbits won't eat it. The other things that could be happening is you could be having some kind of mineral issues. So you want to check with your manufacturer's website and see if anything has been going on, any recalls or anything like that. Sometimes as you get closer to the fall or midsummer-ish, you're going to start to see that the feed is not as fresh as it was. And a lot of times what has happened is your feed companies will buy things like, specifically in rabbits, alfalfa or Timothy hay to mill their feed. They're going to buy that in the fall. So what they're using is they're using stuff that they've had for a while, and now the hay has gotten a little bit more stale. You're usually going to see the freshest feed in the fall. At least that's what we find here. So that could be part of it. If you're pretty confident that the feed is good, that it's just maybe not as fresh as it was, you can try adding some stuff into the feed to get the rabbit back interested. This includes things like rolled oats, old-fashioned oatmeal, black oil sunflower seeds, even a little bit of calf manna. The goal is to make sure that the rabbit stays eating. Now, if you look through the feed and it looks good, there's no smell issues, there's nothing like that, and you don't think an additive is going to make a difference, or if it's just one rabbit in the barn that's having some issues. From there, you want to look at other causes. is the rabbit molting? You know, we might not have seen it in our health check, but if it's during one of your 2 windows of the year and they're molting, they might decide to go off a feed. If this is the case, add lots of hay, lots of fresh water, and just see. If the rabbit is not eating hay and it's not eating its pellets and water consumption is down, now you've got a real problem. Once things have gotten to this point, I would suggest trying to add a very conservative green feed. Most specifically, I would go with something like a dandelion green if you have it available. Dandelion greens don't tend to shock the bunny system quite so bad, but a lot of times if they're not eating anything else, a little bit of green will get them going. Now, be very cautious with this, because if the rabbit hasn't eaten in 24 to 48 hours and you suddenly flood the system with a bunch of greens, you're going to be looking at enteritis and diarrhea. Not a good situation, because now we've got a whole nother problem. So if you've looked at physical condition, you've looked at your feed, you've checked for a mold, and none of this is still the problem, start looking exterior of your coop or your housing to see if there's anything else that might be going on. I know from experience, last year we got a pack rat in the barn, and that was enough to make about half the herd quit eating. They didn't like the rodents in the barn. It causes them a lot of stress and anxiety. Mice, rats, pack rats, squirrels, chipmunks, any of that that's taken up residence in the barn could be causing them enough stress to not want to eat. The other thing that'll happen sometimes is you'll put a rabbit in next to another rabbit, and for whatever reason, somebody goes off a feed. This happens a lot to me in bucks for some reason. If you put a younger buck next to an older buck, sometimes the younger buck will stress out and not eat. So if you've looked at all your other things, you may want to look at maybe shuffling some rabbits around. Sometimes in does, even does that have lived side by side for months or even years, will suddenly decide they just don't like each other. You know, we ladies don't always get along, right? So you may try shuffling and moving everybody around. The key before you start shuffling rabbits is to check the pan underneath, or, you know, whatever your manure and things are dropping into. And what you're looking for here is to make sure that we have no sign of diarrhea or anything else that could be causing the issue. If you've got any of those things, you don't want to go ahead and switch cages. You do want to pull your rabbit out, sanitize the cage, and try and figure out what is causing the distress. It can be distress, it can be coccidia, it can be a number of things. So you'll want to go in and try and figure out why the rabbit has a sick stomach that could be causing it to go off feed. So if we've done a good job examining the rabbit, we've checked all of their feed, and we don't see any issues, we don't see any signs of molt, and we don't see anything in the area, and as far as we know, they're still getting along with their neighbors. At this point, if a rabbit is still off a feed and you can't get them to touch anything, not hay, not dandelion greens, not kale, not even a little piece of chard, no feed, no oats, black oil, sunflower seeds, calf manna, anything. If the rabbit is just flat not eating, now it's probably the time to take him to a vet, or even another experienced rabbit breeder that maybe is going to see something you don't see. Rabbits being off feed can be a pretty big deal. The only time I would not panic and wouldn't worry if we've hit the 48-hour mark and the rabbit hasn't eaten is when they're in the last week of pregnancy. A lot of times does, especially if it's warmer weather, will completely go off feed for the last 2 or 3 days. If that's what's happening, don't panic, just watch her pretty close. The concern with a doe going off of feed that close to kindling is just a spike in her blood pressure and her blood sugars as she gets ready to kindle. Again, this is something where if you've offered her fresh greens and dandelions and hay rather, 9 times out of 10, if it's just a pregnancy issue, they're going to eat something. My girls, for whatever reason, in the last 3 days, crave the oats. So if I've got somebody that goes off feed, I give them a little bit of oats. Oats are really good. They tend to keep the stomach pretty solid, so you don't have to worry about any enteritis issues, and that'll usually jumpstart them back on. So those are my suggestions and my advice for when a rabbit goes off of feed. Now, I will say that 90% of the time, just giving them some grass hay, will make all the difference in the world, or a little bit of additive on top of their feed. There's going to be a few stubborn ones that maybe hold out for the greens. Some of my rabbits probably have my number and know that if I quit eating, Mom will bring the good stuff. Very seldom. I think I've only had 1 or 2 rabbits in the last couple years that went off feed that actually had anything serious going on. We had one impaction that to this day I still don't know exactly what happened, but we did get an impaction, and that caused them to go off feed. And I did have a malocclusion issue, which is the Trianta buck I talked about earlier. So that's my suggestions. If you've got other suggestions or other questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments. As always, I totally invite your feedback. If you've got videos that you want to see me make, things that you want to see me address for rabbits, please let me know. I've been doing this for a while, so I don't always think about the things that new owners might be looking for. So that's it today from Sprague River Homestead. So go out there, raise those rabbits, and happy homesteading.